Hello. We have an intimate gathering today, but I want to thank you all for coming. I'm Cecilia Lynch. I'm the director of the Center for Global Peace and Conflict Studies here at UCI. And we welcome you to the Ghana Project 2010-2011 Collaborative Conversations on the Continent. And the Center for Global Peace and Conflict Studies was one of numerous entities that gave funding and time and effort to sending 23, 24 students, faculty, and staff persons to Ghana to partner with the University of Ghana-Legon last August and September. Everybody that you see here went on the trip. I also went on the trip. Marcella Khalif in the audience also went on the trip, and a number of undergraduate students who are probably in the studio now, as well as a couple of other students who are away or who have now graduated. What we do at CGPACs is then we ask people that we funded to come and report on what they've done. And so those reports are often interim reports because these might have to do with ongoing research projects. But the purpose of today then is to give you a flavor of the different aspects of that collaboration. And so we're very pleased to have several faculty and graduate students who did go on the trip here to talk about their work, including we have Dr. Zara Ahmed, who also went on the trip, who is a political scientist and who is currently working in the undergraduate dean's office, and who did an ongoing study of the collaboration. We'll be talking a little bit about that. We have Professor Jennifer Fisher of the Department of Dance, who will be talking about dance, nationalism, identity, and artistry. Unfortunately, Professor Sharon Ray could not be with us today, but she was the original inspiration and vision of the project. And her work will be visible, I think, through some of the other work that is shown. And we'll try to answer any questions about that to the best of our ability. Shannon Cuykendall is a graduate MFA student who will talk about music and dance embodying rhythm. Dr. Jessica Millward will be talking about slave resistance, public memory, and construction of diaspora. She was our historian who led our trips to the slave fortresses at Elmina and Cape Coast. And Joe Knox is a recent MFA who will talk about cultural heritage and exploring b-boy culture in Ghana. So again, I want to thank you all very much for coming today, and I'm going to start off with Dr. Zara Ahmed, who will begin by talking about the different facets of the collaborative project. So thanks.
Good morning, almost afternoon, everybody. Oh, it is afternoon, it's 12 o'clock. I was a part of the Collaborative Conversations on the Continent project on multiple levels, one of which was as a researcher, someone who had some questions that I wanted to at least begin to investigate, because this was my first trip to the continent as well as to Ghana, so I just wanted to kind of get a feel for the contours and the structure of this partnership, this budding partnership between UC Irvine and the University of Ghana. And I also unwittingly became somewhat of a, not a mentor, but I occupied an interesting intermediate status, because I wasn't necessarily faculty at the time, but I was no longer a student. And so I was able to talk relatively candidly with the students, as well as with the staff, as well as with our partners at the University of Ghana. So what I have seen as this partnership has evolved is that there are many facets of the partnership, of the project itself, and the richness of the project has really encouraged multiple divisions and departments on campus to want to be a part of it, to help us clarify our goals and really create a sustainable structure for this project so that we can continue for years to come. One of the projects that has evolved from our Collaborative Conversations project is this evaluation that we are participating in through the Division of Undergraduate Education, which is really aimed at helping us, number one, kind of revisit the experience now that we've had some distance, Again, to clarify what our intentions were, why we went to Ghana, but also what was unexpected and new that came out of the experience. We have recently hosted Professor Onisoa, who is a dance professor at the University of Ghana, as well as a team of his dancers, as part of this reciprocity aspect of the project. And we wanted to really represent our intention of not only taking from or learning from our Ghanaian partners, but also trying to contribute to their knowledge and their growth. So the project really has many moving parts, and it's definitely our sincere hope that we can continue, as I said, create a sustainable model so that as great as this year was, we can offer the same experience or an even better experience for students and staff and faculty in the years to come. Just briefly, some of the exploratory interviews that I did were centered around, again, just getting a feel for how this partnership is developing and what our partners at the University of Ghana want to see happen. So one of the major findings, if you could call it that I ran across was, number one, that the project is rich enough and expansive enough to encourage the participation of many different kinds of individuals who see the value in what we're doing, and they feel that by participating they can meet their own interests, and so they were committed to helping us create a sustainable model. Another thing that I found was just relative to this whole process of creating partnerships in general was that they really appreciated being asked early on, what is it that you would like to see? What is it that you would like to change? What seems to be going well? So just in terms of some early findings and information that has informed me in my research, I found that the trip to be very, very valuable, and it's continuously unfolding and teaching me new things. So with that being said, we have several presenters with various interests, and the first of our presenters is Professor Jennifer Fisher, and she's going to be talking about dance, nationalism, identity, and artistry.
Thank you. Is it okay to sit here? I am interested in choreographic politics. And choreographic politics is the name of a book by a colleague and friend who has looked at the national dance movement, state-supported national dance groups. So one of the things I was aware of before I went to Ghana was that there were at least 2 national dance groups that were formed for particular reasons. And I wanted to know if they fit into the model of the national dance group, which is started really in the 1930s in the former Soviet Union with a company called Moiseo. And after that, Ballet Folklorico, Bayanikan, National Ballet Senegal, a lot of different dance companies have been formed. This model really promotes a unity within a nation as well as visibility. And throughout the world, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of national dance companies, but not in the developed world, where they're not searching so much for viability and visibility. They've got plenty of visibility, so they don't support the arts in quite the same way. And I found out before going that the Ghanaian Dance Ensemble, which our dancers were privileged to study with, was formed shortly after 1957 independence. It was formed for a couple of reasons. It was post-colonial, where they were looking for their own voice and their way of putting together what represented Ghana. They were looking for a way to unify the country to many ethnicities and many tribal affiliations and areas, zones, religions in Ghana. So I was interested in the choices they had made in terms of embodied representation, because every company around the world will search for the images that can best present the country to itself and to the rest of the world. So I knew that they were asking themselves what it is to be Ghanaian, and unbeknownst to them, I think they formed a company very much in the model of many other nations. And certainly when the former Soviet Union broke up, there are companies that used to be Soviet companies, the Georgian companies, Circassians, a lot of different companies who burst out and became national companies at last. It was what they wanted to do. They didn't have to be called Russian anymore. It's a very important way of representing. And in Ghana, a music and dance culture, it's quite likely that was the reason. This was their first idea of the first statement. Opoku says initially, Kwame Nkrumah says initially for Opoku and Nketiah, two major figures in dance and music, we have to have a company. So this company remained at the University of Ghana-Legon. Another company broke off to the National Theatre. They both represent tradition in Ghana. But Ghana is facing modernization, globalization. So I was kind of interested in how they define themselves. And I knew that when we went, we were well prepared to see ourselves as a diverse group, going to a place where we might have an idea of what Africa was, what Ghana was, what the kind of dance was. Our group came focusing on modern ballet, contemporary tap, the things that UCI's dance department, one of the strongest in the country, focuses on. So Shannon, big in ballet. Joe also represented something outside the dance company, the dance department, which is b-boy breakdance, people who rehearse in the garages and other places, a very vital component of dance, but not yet in the so-called high art concert dance world. Then we had a few dancers with us who had salsa bodies, other kinds of embodied knowledges. So I watched them meet. We tried to understand, but we became the Americans, the Californians, the UCI people, the Ghanaians. And there were reasons to make those distinctions, but we became more and more informed about the kind of representation they did. So what I was thinking about as I've gotten home and while I was there is that these are modern people who are dealing with tradition and innovation. All the time they're working on their traditional repertory, very proud of it, making choices as all national dance companies do. How do we theatricalize these pieces? How do we represent Ghana? And unity and diversity is their theme. We watched them, and then one day we watched a piece by Benjamin Ayete, choreographed, and I don't think any of us knew what that piece was going to be, and it blew us away. We were stunned by it because I think we expected to see more traditional dance, and this was a contemporary vocabulary to us. It looked, if you know the dance world, a little like Albanelli's American Dance Theater, Donald McHale's work, which is modern dance very much influenced by the African Diaspora, Africanist aesthetics. So you had this energy, you had a vocabulary with mobile torso, you had definitive attack, you had youthful vigor, you had angles, polyrhythms, architecture, which is something I speak about in terms of Balanchine. I am a Russian ballet specialist who also got into dances around the world because ballet has been very much affected by this Africanist aesthetic, but it looks very different. So we saw this piece, we were blown away by it. Partially I was because I was expecting more traditional dance. I thought they specialized there, but they don't specialize. They take their traditional vocabulary and they are people who are moving with new influences. So I got to thinking that at night, they don't go to bed thinking, did I serve Ghana well today? Am I a Ghanaian dancer? Did I do a Ghanaian dance? They've already dealt with this idea of what is dance in Ghana, and they're moving forward with it. And they are artists. And yet in the world scene, they know that they have to be contemporary artists if they want to take their art anywhere else. So I started thinking about how from the outside we stereotype Ghanaian dance as being culture-bearing dance. And there is this distinction which I have fought against in my last book, which talked about the Nutcracker Ballet as a ritual, a sociocultural ritual that reflects a certain time period in North America and values in North America. So I wanted to see that divide between concert dance and what African dance is, to see it with a little more blurred boundaries. Because I knew the artists in Ghana who are trapped in a way by stereotype or by their early arrival on the world scene of contemporary dance, and by everyone else's perception of them. They've got to show up and do the traditional, that's what's expected. But they are artists who are going into the future. Our dancers are already in some kind of amorphous future sometimes. They don't even know that what they do is reflecting culture, but they've got a tremendous technical arsenal. And they were trying to pick up something that looked pretty easy at first, move with the beat, they have no idea how to do it. So when the Ghanaian dancers came here, I saw that they were also struggling with the traditional rhythms and all of a sudden breaking out into something that would be more contemporary, jazzy, North American. So I started seeing a conversation going on in terms of embodied knowledge. And I'm dying to hear more about Shannon's exploration into music, because they did individual, thank you, individual projects. But Joe and I think we're on the same level of finding that the way that the Africanist movement was, as Brenda Dixon-Gottschall has said, dreadlocked into the fabric of American society and American dance. We were looking for those roots. The first thing I saw was b-boy. Then I understood, I was watching many influences that turned European ballet into jazzy contemporary ballet. And then I was hearing more than seeing what Joe was doing in terms of battling in the different embodied knowledges that the b-boys and breakdancers have there. And I saw the conversations getting more and more interesting through a dance lens, because that was my focus when I went. So very much interested in seeing and helping, if I can, the Ghanaians to enter this world without the definition that other people have placed on them as artists, as people creating something that it's possible to talk about something not specific, or it has specific roots, just as ballet, modern tap, all those things do, and jazz. But it also has universal implications, universal in terms of the fact that it's about the human condition, exploring the way that we relate to life, the world, dilemmas. So I look forward to ongoing conversations and hearing the version of the research my colleagues have today as well. So before Sure, I was supposed to show we were just going to show you visuals. Dance people hate to talk without having the dancing body in the room. So this is actually on the website. It's a nice little collection of things. If we press play, are we going to start from there?
Yeah. Press play. But I'd like to, let's see, I want to.
You want to maximize it?
Yeah, maximize it.
Right here? I'm pointing like you can see.
I'm sorry. So this is at the University of Ghana-Legon.
Sharpen your concentration, your rhythm, give you confidence to sort of get into the polyrhythms. The students and much of the faculty did drumming every day as well. Music and dance are not separated. This is a film shoot, having fun outdoors, bringing in sort of a modernist feeling with traditional dance. At the film shoot, there was a seller of something in a cart who came by and just joined in, because everybody dances there, especially the men.
Yeah, there's Marcella. Right, exactly.
Sharon Ray, visionary of the project.
Yeah. Okay. So that gives you a bit of a flavor too of some of the collaborations, some of the different movements, some of the things that the students and everyone were actually doing. Our next speaker is Shannon Cuykendall, who is finishing up her MFA, who will be speaking on music and dance embodying rhythm.
Hi. I went to Ghana looking for answers about the relationship between music and dance. As a choreographer, I'm very aware of the power that music has when I dance, and it affects how I dance and how I choreograph. In the past, I've looked into various collaborations between musicians and dancers, such as classical ballet choreographer Marius Petipa and Tchaikovsky, the dance came first, the music came second. In Merce Cunningham and John Cage, they created the music and dance separately and didn't try to build a relationship. Choreographers sometimes use no music, and sometimes they create their own. And this is kind of what I've been exploring on my own, is creating my own music and wanting the music and dance to emerge together. For one, not to be in control of the other, but for them to emerge at the same time. I heard that this idea that music and dance are thought of as one in Ghana and in Africa in general. And I read about this a lot before I went to Ghana, and I didn't really have a good grasp of what that really meant. And I started forming my own ideas, because for me, when I create my own music, I don't think of the dance. And when I create the dance, I'm not thinking of the music. And so I had this romantic view of what this might look like, of music and dance being as one. And I didn't really find what I was looking for in Ghana. I found a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. I found something quite different than what I was looking for. I had a discussion with the master drummer of the Ghana Dance Ensemble. And he told me, he said, in traditional dances, the master drummer has control. And I thought that, when he told me this, I thought, well, this seems just like how we view it here, that the music has control over the dance. And that's not really what I wanted to hear. And then he also said when he was composing music, he would think of a rhythm maybe while he was walking down the street, and then he would go and play it for the dancers. And I said, oh, do you think of the dance while you're creating the music, or you just think of them separately? And he said, no, that's for the dancers to figure out. And so I felt I needed to understand this a bit more. And he then said something that made a lot of sense. He said, if you do not know the dance, you cannot play, you cannot feel it. And this is kind of what I feel like I learned the most in Ghana about the relationship between music and dance. It's a symbiotic relationship of how they both support one another. I've been reading a book, Studies in African Music by a Ghanaian author, A.A. Arbodo, and I feel he explains it very well. He says, musical experience is by and large an emotional one. Sounds, however, are meaningless if they do not offer this experience or contribute to the expressive quality of a performance. The African attaches great importance to dancing for the fact that it is the avenue for bodily movement, which provides for release of emotion. And so while I was in Ghana, I learned how to embody rhythms, and I felt really explore this sensation this author talks about. I come primarily from a classical ballet background, and our views are really different in the relationship between music and dance. There's often in Western music and for classical ballet one melodic line, and we normally follow that pretty much in unison. However, in Ghanaian dance, there's many competing counter rhythms and different meters. And the dancer doesn't just mimic one in unison, but becomes one of their own rhythmic component of the music. So it's not just following the rhythm, but really holding your own part to the whole entire picture. We learned rhythm in lots of different ways in Ghana. We clapped rhythms, we sang rhythms, we danced the rhythms, and we played it on our drums. And I felt like we explored the rhythm from every possible angle we could. And so I was embodying it in every way possible, and I really came from an understanding of it. The master drummer also told me, in order to become a master drummer, you have to know every dance. You have to know how to dance every dance and how to play every rhythm. The dancers also have to know how to play the rhythms. And it's this understanding that each one has of the other that allows them to have this symbiotic relationship between the music and dance in Ghana. I didn't really realize how much I learned until I came back to UCI. When we were dancing, often we listened to auditory cues for us to change. And so when the master drummer said that he had control, he did at some times. He would play something, and then that would tell us when we moved on to the next thing. And however, sometimes I watch the dancers for when to change. In the dance we learned Ajabo, a dancer did this, and then we all moved on to the next thing. So I felt like even though he said he had complete control, I felt it was somewhat shared. But when we came back to UCI, we taught the dancers that did not go to Ghana. We taught them Ajabo, the dance, one of the traditional dances that we learned. And we found that we weren't counting. Often in the Western world, we count in 8 phrases, and that's how we are in unison together. However, in this dance, we were just listening for the change of the drum, and then we all knew that we would go on to the next thing. And the dancers that didn't go to Ghana kept asking, well, what are the counts? How many do we do? And we just said, well, you just listen, and then you change. And we had no idea how many we were doing of this particular step. We just knew when to change. And I really then grasped that I had this new sensation when I was dancing, of being completely in the moment while I was dancing, not counting, but really just the dance and the music were really connected, and I was immersed in it. And then there's also the role of improvisation that is so often incorporated in the traditional dances, and also the master drummer often improvises the rhythms. And there's this dialogue between the musician and the dancers. And I really don't get the sense that one is higher than the other or controls the other, but it's a constant conversation, give and take, between the music and the dance. My research at UCI, I'm interested in studying motivations behind movement. In addition to studying the relationship between music and dance, I'm also currently studying the relationship between visuals and dance for my thesis project. I think that everything has an origin. Even if a dance movement comes from an emotion, I want to find out where does that emotion come from. And can a movement ever be unemotional? And these are things that I am continuing to explore in my choreography in relation to what I learned in Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Next, we have Professor Jessica Millward, and the title of her research will be Slave Resistance, Public Memory, and Construction of Diaspora.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Good afternoon. I will shoot away from the computer before I could load my props. It's okay. So give me 1 second. You know, this is pretty par for the course for my class, so in case you wanted to know what I look like in the classroom, here you go. I am in that user, so now the whole internet knows that.
Does anybody have any questions of the presenters? Maybe?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Don't you take the Q&A at the end?
Good.
Well, hopefully we're ready. Okay, so I'd like to first of all thank the Center for not only supporting our research while we're in Ghana, but giving us the opportunity to present some of our findings. And I'm deliberately leaving this shot on the screen as I talk. We will get to it. I am a historian of U.S. history and African American history, and in some senses you would think, well, what does that have to do with dance? West African dance is probably the only hobby I've ever had in my life, so there you go. When I was invited to go on this trip with Professor Ray, I said, this is wonderful. 3 weeks of dancing and drumming, what's not to like? And then I was quickly benched and wasn't allowed to be in the performance. But I have heart though, because Professor Ayeke said that the problem is you're just not dancing with your heart. You gotta let your heart lead. And I then told him I'm a scholar, and I respectfully sat down because, you know, that's just too much emotion for me. Having said that, one of the reasons I was interested in going to Ghana in particular is that I had visited the year before, and being a scholar of slavery, we often talk about the ways in which things in the diaspora are connected without really understanding, I wouldn't so much say their origin, I would say more, as Shannon would say, that movement and emotion in some ways can't be disconnected from one another. So when we think about the displacement of upwards of 21 million Africans, the majority of whom came from the Gold Coast, which is present-day Africa, we start seeing the ways in which emotion can replay itself in dance, in intellect, in music, and things that we see in the New World. I'm particularly a scholar of the enslaved women's experience. And enslaved women, despite their ethnic origin, despite the region that they were displaced into, and despite the labor regime, be it coffee that they were forced to produce, be it cotton, be it indigo or tobacco, enslaved women of African descent employed similar tools to resist their enslavement, and in particular their sexually exploited enslavement throughout the New World. They engaged in forms of practicing abstinence. They induced abortions when they were inopportunely impregnated by overseers or their masters. They did more common things like breaking tools, urinating on cotton to make it weigh heavier before it got to market, only to have the owner find out that they had been fooled. So that the enslaved woman's experience in what becomes the New World is undergirded by a theme of resistance. And resistance, in the words of Gad Human and James Walvin, is in fact the story of slavery itself. But resistance is also the story of African women's survival and some of the techniques that women in Ghana, in Jamaica, in modern-day Africa, America, use to survive their own experience derives itself from this critical interaction between being used as a reproductive laborer in some ways and a physical laborer. For the descendants, for African women or descendants of African women who come to the New World, children we know who are born in bondage have the potential to engage in active revolts and form types of resistance that some people might not recognize. They might not recognize it because in some senses the resistance of Africans, enslaved women and so forth, did not always easily translate into a formal dismantling of the state. We have the model of the American Revolution, of course, that the only true revolution is that which completely overthrows the system of government. For an enslaved woman, their condition was always tantamount to revolt because they had to evade the sexual persecution of those people who owned them. They also had to find a way to raise their children despite all odds. Scholars presently debate whether or not resistance, or as they're calling it now, agency, is the proper term for some of the actions of enslaved women and, by and large, people who in some ways are written out of the main fabric of historical narratives. I continue to prefer the term resistance, as agency abstracts the innate ability of choice from the subject who we hope to render as real. Read another way, agency does not presume that Africans, in this case, possessed an intellectual framework. Rather, historians are giving them something. As humanitarians, there's also often the sense that when people go to Africa, they are giving Africa something. This project, I'm proud to say, actually reverses that and realizes that there's much to be gained from going to Africa. In fact, we are better for it. So the image you're looking at is actually a mortar ball that originally had a chain attached to it, and it's just from Elmina Castle. And it sits in the center of the courtyard. of Elmina. Well, people call it castle, I just call it castle, but it's actually one of the largest slave dungeons in Ghana, and it is responsible for housing a significant portion of Africans that came to the New World. But in the center of the courtyard is this ball that had a chain to it, and when the fort was operating, it was often attached to the leg of an enslaved woman, or what I call a captive African, because at this point they are not yet enslaved. And the person who was chained to the ball was the woman who usually tried to resist the sexual exploitation of the governor of Elmina or some of his employees. When you think about the dungeons in Ghana, Cape Coast Castle and Elmina are the first two that come to mind. But there's presently more than 40 structures still standing in Ghana to house, and they were, of course, used to house enslaved people, but we now, today in this century, they have multiple meanings. They can be tourist attractions. They house parliament in Ghana. Crystal Castle holds parliament. And some, if they're rendered correctly, just stand naked and barren and serve as markers so that people realize that African Holocaust can never happen again. But of course, all of this was rhetorical. And the trip was much more fun than the weight that some people have to carry or embody in living with the enslaved experience. So bear with me, because I'll bring this back up again. If you were to just arrive in Elmina or Cape Coast, you are strictly struck, the villages themselves, by the bustling city life, the fishing villages, children are running about, and the structure of the dungeons looms in the distance. When you walk into the dungeon, you are overpowered by smells, despite the best restoration efforts. And if you listen very carefully, you can hear the walls cry. You can hear the wails of mourning, the screams, and the cries of torture. And when the door to the male prison closes in Cape Coast, all you hear is the ocean. You cannot see, but you are left to imagine what it must have been like for captives within these walls. In reconstructing dungeons for tourists, the Ghanaian government is very mindful that the dungeons also serve a particular purpose for African Americans or people who are of African descent in the New World. And by celebrating the diasporic link between Africa and America, and in particular the return of home, I believe the Ministry of Tourism believes the dungeons serve a dual purpose. The first is that it allows Ghana's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade as a source of embarrassment to recreate itself. And the second is that the existence of these sites as a type of commemoration for those lost reaffirm the Pan-African ethic espoused by Kwame Nkrumah. The independence of Ghana is meaningless. The independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked to the total liberation of Africa. With this in mind, one of the ways I bring Ghana home, and Pan-Africanism in particular, because when I went to Ghana, I was thinking of myself as a diasporic scholar, but I emerged looking at myself more as a Pan-Africanist, looking at the linkages among people, particularly enslaved people in the New World. And despite not speaking the same language, having the same religion, being from the same place of origin, they all use the same resistance strategies, and obviously for enslaved women, I've already spoken about what those are. So going to this image, one of the things that I like my students to do is to look at material culture and think about it in a different way. And if my next attempt at trying to be, multimedia, which never works for me, works, then maybe it's going to sound better. Maybe not. Okay, well, I'm not gonna spend time trying to make it work. It would have been beautiful. I've told this story to other people, so I think it's worth running this clip from the internet. The song I like my students to look at when they're thinking about slavery, and now certainly Pan-Africanism, is Bob Marley's Redemption Song. And Redemption Song is found on, and I've done this. I've asked my students who has Redemption Song on their iPod, and of course they all raise their hand and they're very pleased with themselves. And they know the words, but what they don't know, that is, of course, it's a song about slavery. And it talks about being taken, well, a pirate ship, of course, takes the captive from the bottom of the bottomless pit. So I'm going to try two things. I'm going to run Bob Marley's song. At the same time, we're looking at the image of the cannonball from Elmina, because I think there's a way in which that if we listen closely to what these enslaved, well, soon-to-be enslaved captive women are telling us, and the ways in which we understand Pan-African liberation coming back from our trip to Ghana, we also can listen, we also, in some ways, can do some restorative work. Unless the player doesn't work, then I have to what the story then looks like. These are not the upwards of 21 million people who go quietly into the night. They're not, as Professor Wationgo says, people that can be silenced in a particular way. I can't compete with Bob, so I'm just trying to get rid of him. Okay, so if we think about the presence of African captives, they don't go silently into the night. This has much to do with the kind of diaspora framework or Pan-African politicization that some of us walked away from Ghana with. And I think that our job in terms of activists, as scholars, in my case as historians, is to not just commemorate certain events, but also find a way in which this collective memory can give way to a collective identity. How we choose to engage in this work is not simply a matter of discourse, as we can better understand humanity through the words, the thoughts, and the embodied movements of those who came before us. At worst, we can be assured that those who graced the pages of our books and other projects have done a kind of justice in our response to their call to be remembered, and at best, we can honor them by providing rest for their souls. Thank you.
Our final presenter today is Joe Knox, a recent MFA from across campus, who's going to talk about cultural heritage, exploring b-boy culture in Ghana. And I should just say that Joe was one of the more popular members of the trip. Not that everybody else wasn't popular, but he would do a few moves whenever the bus stopped and crowds would gather. So anyway.
Thank you, Professor Millward. That was amazing. If I could just get a minute, I want to be able to look up my computer to show you guys pictures, because pictures are 1,000 words in my case. So I'm not sure which, I don't want to mess this up. afternoon.
Well,
Can
I
help?
think we're done with this.
We're done with this?
Let's see. Yeah, so, yeah. Good too. What you need?
Yes.
I think I know these things.
I survived. So someone else I hope does.
Anybody thinks a good, is there a technologist in the house?
I say always be ready to dance out your presentation.
You can do that, Joe. We know you can.
I can, but I'm going to turn on my computer and just hope that everyone can see the
Actually,
pictures that I want to
don't know
show.
if you can.
No, I didn't put it on my face,
Oh, you don't
Not
want to
go out
get
there.
a little bit.
The last.
Always travel with your backpack.
Always travel in my back.
You know-
You don't have anything on your Facebook account?
I do, but it's intermixed with a lot of things that.
Right.
Is it possible that I could just turn my computer around and you guys could see what I'm showing you?
Feel free to come on
Yeah.
over, okay? Feel free to come on
I
over.
apologize for
everybody.
the technological malfunctions, but I did want to show you certain pictures of, different occurrences. So my research or my lecture is called Cultural Heritage, Exploring B-Boy Culture in Ghana. And there's so much that I could talk about that I thought it would probably be best to link it all the way from where I'm coming from, the culture I'm representing, when I was going to there. This, obviously, is a party shot, but it's significant. I had a going away party, and every person you see in here is a breakdancer. We have a very tight-knit, close culture. Everyone is very good friends. We dance together. We practice together. It's very, very close-knit. And going to Africa, I carried with me a lot of the things that people expected, like, oh, you're going to go to Africa. Well, everyone thinks that there's, B-boy cultural roots there, so go and find out the truth for us. When other people were just like, you're going to Africa, I'm so jealous of you. I want to go to Africa. So definitely there was a lot kind of that I was carrying for other people, on my back. And this is kind of just a representation of, the people that, were asking me to find things out for them. So I didn't feel like I was going on my own. I felt like there were other people right along with me the whole time. So I'm going to just keep moving on here. This is me arriving in Ghana. Again, I'm just coming with a B-boy culture. Is anyone here familiar with B-boy culture at all? Yes? 1, 2, 3? Okay, for those of you who don't know, I'll give you a crash course. So in New York, there started a kind of this dance scene where people would be in gangs, and rather than fight their problems out, they would dance their problems out. And it kind of just grew from there. Moves got more complex, more acrobatic. From the 1970s to now, it has just been a big uphill, an ascension of movements and styles and dancing, and just it incorporates everything. Moving on. So here we have Elmina Castle. I think the biggest thing that I wanted to say about Elmina Castle is that it probably was the most intense experience of my life thus far, going to this castle. And it's not the reason why you might think. Obviously the slavery thing that happened there, it's horrible, but it was what happened before we got into the castle and what happened when we got out of the castle that really informed me in a lot of ways, changed me in a lot of ways, and made me really question a lot of the assumptions that I had about my own culture. So as we're traveling through Ghana, we're in a bus, and we're a group of white tourists, mostly, in a bus. So wherever we go, it causes sensation. People just crowd the bus, they want to sell us things, they want to know who we are, what we're doing, and this was no exception. Going to Elmina Castle, we were surrounded. The minute I got off the bus, there was someone in front of me asking everybody what type of dancers we were. And so of course I said, well, I'm a break dancer, and I was the only break dancer on the trip. And so his eyes got really big and he ran and took off somewhere. And I didn't think much of it at first. So going to the slave castle, it's horrible, the smells are horrible, I'm just feeling just so bad, like how could this happen, And when I came out, there was this crowd waiting, and there was a guy just sitting there, and he jumps up and starts dancing in front of me. And so what had happened is, the guy who had asked me what type of dancer I was, ran out and found the B-boy champion of Elmina, to come and battle me right there in front of the slave castle. You have to battle right away. That's our culture. If you don't battle right away, you're not in our culture. So of course I had to say, yes, okay, we'll battle right there. So I have pictures of the battle. This is afterwards, of course. His name was B-Boy Machine, or they just called him Machine because he was just this ridiculous acrobat. Didn't have a lot of dance skills, but he sure had acrobatic skills. And so I'm not sure if you can see very well, but this is in the middle of our battle. We were doing a lot of back and forth. This is me doing a windmill at the end, which clinched the battle for me, and I'll get into that in a little while. I just want you guys to see these pictures. Here he is right there. And it felt, there was also this guy, he was like I forget his name, but he was our hype man. He was running around yelling at the top of his lungs. He had a big old container and he was getting donations, and it felt like the entire town just stopped everything they were doing to watch, you know, the white B-boy and the town champion battle it out. So that was pretty intense. I don't know if you can see this well, but this is what he sent me afterwards. Nice picture of him, little Joe Knox, Machine Prayer. So, having that battle with Machine was very profound for me in a lot of different ways. I want to talk about the embodied knowledge that I saw and how it relates to my breaking. The things that he did were much more acrobatic in strange ways. He was much more flexible in his shoulders than I was. So he would be able to lift his entire body off the ground and completely rotate his shoulder joint behind him. He had much more flipping and much more twisting moves. And really, like, we were pretty neck and neck. And what clinched it for me, winning that battle, because I did win, that's what he says, and of course I'm like, no, we tied, but he says I won, so I'm like, okay, was power moves. And if you guys don't know what power moves are, they're a gymnastics type of movement. Your legs are open, you're spinning very fastly. There's a picture of me doing it up there. I'm doing a windmill, which is just a continuous backspin. I'm not sure where that move comes from, but what's interesting and why this is significant that he didn't have these moves and had a different set of moves that I'd never seen before, what really makes it significant is the actual roots of what's there along the Cape Coast. So essentially, you have something called the Asafo, and this is a while back. This was during the slave times, slave castle times, all the way up till now. And the Asafo is just like the origins of breaking. You have gangs all in one place who, rather than have bloody conflict, have a flag dancer. One person that they elect, carry their flag, whip it around, and do acrobatics and battle the opposing flag dancer in acrobatics, which is breakdance. Breakdance is just acrobatic battle. And it's significant because what Machine was showing me was their traditional movement. And he hadn't seen traditional breakdance movement. He'd never seen someone move like that before. And the reason why is technology. He was going from a tradition, and I was coming from a scene where, like, I can go on YouTube and learn how to do whatever moves I want to learn, because we have that. In Ghana, they don't have that. Or they have online sources, but it's slow online sources. They're just now getting a new network, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So they're not used to, they don't even know that the breakdance scene is huge worldwide. So Ghana right now is like the original place where this kind of thing started, and they don't even know how big it is throughout the entire world. So that was very interesting to me. And the way that he moved showed me that. He showed me things that I'd never seen in the breakdance world, despite it being international. And I showed him things that he'd never seen before, because he's not linked into that. You understand what I'm saying? Make sense? Another thing I need to talk about is the actual music. So everyone knows in the 1950s, Ghana had its liberation. And fishermen along that same coast, Elmina and Cape Coast, came up with something called palago. And it's a type of music, drumming music, celebratory, celebrating independence. The rhythmic structure of palago music is exactly the same as breakdance music. We have the same rhythmic functions, generally the same tempo, and we embody all of our movement from that drum pattern. We are a drum language dance. Palago rhythm, I brought some drums to demonstrate it. It gives me a deeper understanding of b-boy history, because if there are records in the 1970s that people are playing that have this rhythm and everyone's dancing to a particular type of records, and then those same rhythms originated in Africa, well, I mean, then obviously our dancing originated in Africa. It draws a cultural connection. And so, thank you. I want to... Sure. Actually, I think I'll be okay. It's a palago drum. And even the thing that we were learning the entire time while in Ghana is palago rhythm, which one? If you just speed that up slightly, that is a breakdance rhythm. So if I could have everyone's assistance, I want everyone to clap for me. There you go. That is a breakdance rhythm. That is the rhythm that we all dance to. And it comes from this type of drum, from this type of culture in Ghana. And I don't think it's just limited to that also. Now we're getting into kind of theoretical. These are something I picked up there also. So depending on who I asked, they would say that there are different names for this. But it's basically two shakers tied together. And they click like a castanet. People call them chakra, people call them kaskas, people call them all kinds of different names, depending on which tribe you ask. And they all say it comes from my country. Oh, it comes from Mali. No, it comes from Ghana. No, it comes from Togo. So I don't really know. But the point is, even the basic rhythm of this is a breakdance rhythm. I could just do this all day, and people could breakdance to it, or pop to it, or lock to it, or any other type of American street dance. It's just in that rhythm, a 3 against 4. So there's some very interesting things going on with it. So having experienced like African culture, I mean, I would say like it was very akin to the culture that I know on the b-boy scene. They're really very similar, very kind of like everyone's based on drumming, everyone's based on a cipher, you know, getting together and all making improvised things happen at the same time. Whether it's joking around or dancing or drumming or making rhythms, it's a cipher. A cipher is a term that we use for just an improvisatory setting of dancing. It's something we do here at UCI-Ghana. So I want to just go ahead and show you some more pictures here. This is me teaching at Noyam. I would go to different places and show people moves. They wanted to have my moves. I wanted to have their moves, but I felt like everywhere I went, if I did a little bit of breaking, I was teaching people because they all wanted to learn it. These are 2 b-boys that I met on the coast. They're from a team called Courier. And I ended up having to battle an entire crew, their entire crew, so that was very interesting. And again, like, the only thing that puts me over the top of these guys is doing power moves, because all the other acrobatics, they're way higher than me. So I really just have my deep American, you know, styles that are getting me, you know, in with these guys. Even another guy from Korea. This guy can hold a one-handed handstand forever. You know, legs closed, legs open, an inch off the ground. And, you know, do the same thing with his back, but he's just incredibly strong. Otto. This would be, you know, doing the same kind of movements at a shrine, messing around. On the top of the stadium. Yeah, it was crazy. And then here, I wanted to bring it back to the community I'm coming from. You know, this is practically every breakdancer at UCI in one group photo. And you wouldn't know it here, but at this school, there's an incredibly rich breakdance, street dance scene. Despite from the, I'm not talking about the choreo teams, the ones you see practicing in the garage. That's something completely different. I'm talking about breakdance, popping, and locking. There is a huge community here, and it's very tight-knit, and it's very similar to what I experienced in Ghana. What they created for us in Ghana was something similar to what we already have here on this campus. This is our alumni, old man. He's taking some fun pictures with my friends. And I wish it was blown up on the screen. But hopefully you guys can see it. Yeah, and so I just wanted to leave you with the idea that what's there in Ghana is very similar to what's already here on this campus in certain regards. And you guys have any questions?
Have you incorporated any of the moves that you learned there into?
Oh yes. Oh yes. To mixed reaction. For instance, we learned Ajabo. I can use Ajabo, in a cipher. It works. But when I do it, I don't get a serious reaction. I get a humorous reaction. People think it's a joke. And I really think that there's a racial element involved. I think because I have lighter colored skin, doing movements like that here in this culture, people laugh. Which is not to say that I don't know if that's bad, I don't know if that's good, but it is what it is. And I still use it though, because I love it. And I'm going to continue to use it. But the way that my culture works is that we don't just take Ajabo and display Ajabo in the cipher. We take Ajabo and mix it up, abstract it down, and use parts of it in our own freestyle. So yeah, that'll always be a part of me, and I'm always going to be incorporating it into what I do. In fact, if anything, doing all the squat exercises and moving like that made me such a stronger breakdancer to begin with. My legs and lower back got much stronger from it. So yeah, I'm going to continue to do it for sure.
You can open it up to questions for any of the panelists if you all have questions.
You mentioned that, do you think that it started in Africa and then it came to the US, or did it just start separately as a kind of a human expression?
I think it started in Africa and came to the US.
Well, technically speaking, it's an American form that has African roots that you're saying are the strongest from among a huge number of influences, because you can list, there were a lot of Latino influences. It really centers around certain boroughs in New York, and capoeira, cartoons, martial arts, a huge number of things went into it. But when Joe was going over, he said, it's rumored that there are roots of b-boy. I said, it's not a rumor. The diaspora came here, and we've been tracing every single thing that came with strong roots in Africa into the diaspora. But the African-American component of that was only part, but a really big part.
Yeah.
So in that way, yes, a lot of it started in Africa. But the actual coalescing is really around the late 60s, early 70s in New York.
Yeah, she's right.
But if you look at capoeira and some of these other art forms that display themselves in other parts of the diaspora, I don't know if we can just locate it in New York, because we can locate it in New York, but the people in New York are Jamaican, they're Haitian, they're the diaspora. So we need to think about how we're defining New York.
Yeah.
New York is the diaspora, so yes, it came from Africa and traveled back.
Oh, even capoeira in Angola was created by Africans in Brazil, and it was disguised as a dance, as play, but it was preparation for fighting and for resistance. So all these different connections are there, but I do think it's possible to trace them back to Africa, because that's where many of the origins started.
And then to just piggyback on Zara just for a moment, in terms of dance, there's dance as the expressive form, there's dance as a political form, and if we look at West African traditions of masquerades that then become carnival in the New World, I mean, masquerades are a signal to the neighboring village, they're a signal to the European armies. You might want to continue to walk past this village, because in terms of masquerades, they're politicized, they're proactive. I mean, they've become now decorative in some places, but that's because the political intent is abstracted from the movement.
If I could just say one more thing about the
Yeah, sure, it's your
origins.
question, go ahead.
What I like to trace is the rhythmic aspect, because you're right, Latinos started breaking just as much as African Americans. Capoeira, Angola and Brazil, definitely had a big influence. But our culture is a drum language. What we do is based on drums, and if you have a rhythm, that comes from a certain place, that is the rhythm of the dance, then regardless of how much stuff is pulled in, it's like the ultimate taproot is somewhere there, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we have time for at least a couple more.
You were talking about getting, trying to find a Ghanaian type of dance, like a national identity through dance. Yeah, is that right?
That when the National Dance Company was formed, they were trying to find a unity from diversity, so that they had to define who they were as a national company. That it was a way of bringing together many diverse people by learning each other. They didn't define Ghanaian dance as one kind of dance. They defined Ghanaian dance as embracing an umbrella term for lots of kinds of dance.
Do you think it lost some? Because you're saying that it's a lot of ethnicities, and sometimes ethnicities don't really map into countries, or nations don't map into countries.
Mm-hmm.
Creating a Ghanaian style or dance, did that kind of went against the small?
I don't think they fuse the forms. What national dance companies will tend to do is to do research in various areas and bring the Eve dance, like Ajabo, they will bring that with its integrity, theatricalizing it, but oftentimes really retaining a great core of its identity and the things that define it. They will bring that into the company as a dance or a dance suite. Sometimes the dances from the same area, Ashanti dances, this Eve, Ga, they will define them and keep the roots, so the roots remain very strong. It's when they want to move beyond that, they will start taking elements, and I think they're going through their own arguments about how much you can take from different things and go into the contemporary world with it, which may eventually be called Ghanaian contemporary dance, because you no longer associate it with a particular ceremony, ritual, festival, where it came from. But they're very proud, and should be, as most people are throughout the world, trying to find these dances that represent different people, ethnicities, tribes, religions, there are different roots to it. So their idea in the original company was that we all come together, and I'm Ashanti, but I learn the Eve dance. And I learn not just the dance, but the roots of it. You don't disrespect the dance by removing it, but you understand that it was done for this reason, for that king, for this ceremony. And that's the idea. They don't want you to learn it without context. So unity and diversity is a great idea. It's a problematic idea, I think, but that's what's so interesting about choreographic politics.
I'm wondering if we could, did you have a question? Or was that was just your, okay.
It's for the lady who is the notice. You talk about which has the priority of music or dance in Western Ghanaian. Well, so I can't dance to save my life, but I am a drummer. It sounds like that's the difference. The drums and the rhythms between their culture and ours. The greater role for the drums, that's what drives how synthesized they are. Is that what you saw?
How the drum, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Is it the drums that drive the difference for you? Is that what you found?
It's definitely, I mean, in Ghana, there was, a whole ensemble of drummers that we were working with, and that definitely helped to create this relationship of equality between the music and dance, of us responding with each other. A lot of times in classes, dance classes here, it's to pre-recorded music, so we don't really have that opportunity to work with live musicians. I don't know if it's necessarily, if that can't be created, in other instruments. I think it's quite possible. I think it's more of the understanding that both of them have in each other's genres, understanding the music from dancers and dancers understanding the musicians understanding the dance.
One thing that we might want to do is you might want to, Professor Millward, talk a little bit about Professor Oniso's visit in some of the ongoing collaborations that might ensue from that as a way of kind of wrapping up.
Okay, you want me to start?
Sure, go for it.
So in February, we were very pleased to present Professor Oniso and came from the University of Ghana with 7 dancers, undergraduate and graduate students from the University of Ghana, some of whom are students of dance this summer. This is actually a perfect segue for my one point on dance. My one point on dance is that there was a mixer at the Black Student Union whereby we were able to see just how African American the guests were, and how African or not African the members of the Black Student Union were, in that we, of course, played hip hop. This is after we had a drum circle. They at least did a drum circle first. But they played hip hop. I didn't see any difference between any of the individuals. Did you, Dr. Ahmed? It was seamless. There was such a conversation about let us welcome our African guests that they forgot that there were 20-year-old people who looked and danced and dressed the same way. But because there was this Africa and African American tension in rhetoric, I think they just forgot that they were 20-year-old people. And then it was a multiracial group that eventually joined us at the Black Student Union House. That was just one event. We had several events. Onisoa did a guest lecture on diaspora and community resilience. There were sessions that took place in classrooms. Professor Ray's class, they did a jazz, improvisational interaction between the artists, the dancers that came, the dancers that were enrolled in her course, and musicians on campus such as Joe and Professor Mark Levine, who's not here. Going forward, I think there are many generative aspects of this project. For myself, I'm writing a book on the condition of African captive women within the slave dungeons. I'm also leading a project with Professor Ahmed on health and diaspora, and or health among women in the African diaspora. And then finally, I think we have the potential to do a biannual lecture series or conference that brings students from Ghana back to UCI in a way in which that they can continue a conversation with the students who are engaged in creative endeavors and scholarly research on the diaspora. So in some ways, if the Ghana project is sustained, there can be a summer visit to Ghana, and at least twice a year a visit of Ghanaian artists coming to the U.S.
Closing thoughts? Okay. So I'm going to thank you all very much for coming, and thank our panelists, and just let you know that in line with UCI-Ghana.